7 here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Cool, thanks, JC, and thanks to Ray. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nate Bauer, the director of the University of Alaska Press. Welcome again to the UAF Summer Sessions and University of Alaska Press Authors Corner. Thanks to those here at UAF for choosing to spend part of another magnificent summer week with us here in Fairbanks. It's not exactly a welcoming environment out there with all the construction equipment, but perhaps it's better than the 114 Fahrenheit they're dealing with in Portland and other record temps they have in much of the Pacific Northwest. Because, excuse me, because it's important, I want to be clear about the University of Alaska Fairbanks strict COVID-19 policy of requiring face coverings and social distancing inside all buildings for anyone who is not fully vaccinated. News all week this week has been about the new Delta variant of the COVID virus spreading quickly in many places. So pretty please, if you haven't been vaccinated against COVID, please get vaccinated, please. Thanks to those in particular who are tuning in to the live stream or the video recording later on from Alaska or anywhere else. Thanks for your interest and your attention, and thanks to the University of Alaska Office of Information Technologies, Scott Franzuto and JC Ice for making it happen. Also big thanks to Michelle Bartlett and Summer Sessions for these summer event series presented free of charge. Thanks to tonight's presenter, Ray, Hudson, and all of our UA Press authors for agreeing to participate in this reading and the entire series this summer. I hope everyone attending will make it worth their while. We do have books for sale here in the room. If you're watching online or listening to the stream, you can find more information and you can find a purchase link for Ray's book, Ivory and Paper, at the UA Press website. It's alaska.edu/UA Press. I think we will have some good time for questions at the end of Ray's presentation, so please consider any information and details you'd like to hear more about as you listen to him tonight. We will have microphones that we can bring to you if you're in the room, and for anyone zooming in. And I will just acknowledge we have a limited live audience tonight. So if you are listening via the live stream, I'd encourage you, if you'd like to hear more from Ray after he reads, to submit questions or comments you'd like to hear his thoughts about. Please use the Google form. It's on the link is on the live stream page below the video you're watching right now. You can also find it at bit.ly/author Q&A, no spaces. I hope that while you're at the summer session site, you'll consult the calendar for the rest of the summer and make plans to attend any other events that interest you. We'll post the rest of the scheduled author corner presentations at the conclusion of tonight's event. Other events this week include Clay Van Leeuwen of the Alaska Oral and Facial Surgery Center for the Healthy Living Series on Tuesday, Robbie Herrick of UAF's Geophysical Institute for the Discover Alaska series on Wednesday, and Mark Brown and the Blues Crew for Music in the Garden on Thursday. Okay, Ray Hudson. Ray is the author and editor of at least 6 books, including Moments Rightly Placed, an Aleutian memoir, and several scholarly books on the Aleutian Islands. A retired public school teacher, he is also a woodblock artist and poet who lives in Vermont. He's also, as I found out today, good enough friends with Gary Snyder, who is perhaps the greatest living American poet and one of my own personal literary heroes, that Ray got Snyder to blurb his first book after hosting Snyder for a visit to Unalaska. Pretty impressive. Perhaps more to come on that during the question and answer period. Welcome, Ray. Please join me in welcoming Ray Hudson.
Thank you very much. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, JC, for getting me online, or at least my voice online. I've got a sort of keynote or PowerPoint thing to go along so you don't have to look at me this whole time. And I'm going to try to operate that now. So I hit this, and then I think I go to this. And nothing is happening. Okay, I'm still, share screen, whiteboard. Oh, here we go. Share. You may end up looking at me the whole time.
I do have you here, Ray. I can see, we can still see you, but after you hit the share screen button, it might give you another option to just like select which window you want to.
Yes, it gives me a whole batch of them.
Yeah.
Desktop, whiteboard, mail, Safari, preference unknown, Keynote. Keynote is what
maybe
I'm using.
Yeah, so maybe like double click that.
And then it says to open system preferences again. Oh, wait, yeah.
Oh, okay. JC's saying that you might have to do the same thing and grant it permissions like you did with the microphone.
But when I hit open preferences, nothing comes up again.
Oh.
So let me try it one more time here. If I go to the desktop, I've got it on my desktop. Maybe
you could do desktop. Yeah.
I'll try that. Oh, wait, let me try this. Screen recording. Files, screen recording media. And nothing yet, right?
We don't see anything yet here. No.
Yeah, go back again. Oh, here, whoops. Well, maybe I will just, oh, it's too bad.
Ray, yeah, go ahead if you don't mind reading. And if you have files or slides that you'd like to share, then maybe we can do it for anybody that has tuned in afterwards. There might be a way for us to
sure.
contact
Well,
them.
anyway, okay, so I'm starting with one of the least important puzzles related to Unanga ethnography, and it has to do with which fingers you use to split a blade of grass into the warp when you're working on a basket and you want to get a thin piece of grass. Gabriel Sarachev was in the Aleutians in the 1790s, and he traveled to a number of small villages, and he left important accounts about Unanga dances and shamanistic practices. He said the forefinger was used, and here's a quote: "With the nail of her forefinger, which she suffers to grow to a great length, until it is as sharp as a lancet." And however, I was taught to use the second finger and the thumb. And that's what I've done ever since. When writing about specific art, it's nice to get things right. It's nice, but it's not always possible. Unanga basketry is my passion. And I'll give another example of that from that wonderful art. People who see basketry, see the alley baskets, the Unanga baskets, are always amazed that they're so tightly woven. They sometimes say they're so tight they can hold water. But if you put water in a grass basket, it will quickly lose its shape. There were far better things for holding water, such as bentwood boxes and sea lion stomachs. The same folks will sometimes say that baskets were actually woven underwater. And of course, they weren't. Antisha Shapsnikov, who put up with me for 8 years while I studied basketry with her, had a large bathtub. It was a glorious thing. It was tall, with metal feet, gleaming white, with a wide rim around it. I once tried to get her to pose for a photograph while sitting on the rim with a basket in one hand and a snorkel in the other, and she refused. Um, well, I worried about getting a number of things right when writing Ivory and Paper. And I don't know what I dropped, but anyway, with Ivory and Paper. The cover, by the way, is a painting by Carolyn Reed called Mothership. She's a wonderful artist who's lived at Unalaska for many years and kindly allowed this painting to be used. Ivory and Paper is about two young people, an Unanga girl and a white boy from Vermont, who attempt to return a sacred amulet to its owners. To do this, they travel back to a place and time when the world was populated by animistic spirits. Well, the two problems I had, first, I didn't know how I could possibly make young teenagers, a girl and a boy, however precocious they might be, not sound like a 70-year-old man. And second, I wondered how I could convey the energy and magic of reanimated cultural practices when what is claimed and animated is sometimes questionable and sometimes just wrong. Because I do believe there is a magic in this recreation, an energy that extends beyond the particular craft or practice itself. First, to the writing. I owe much to novelist and teacher Jerry Brightwell and to James Engelhardt, then at the UA Press. They both continually tossed the manuscript back to me with astute and at times painful suggestions, many of which I took. Whether I succeeded or not, who knows? Here's a short passage where Anna introduces herself. I'm not saying this didn't happen or that it couldn't happen again or that I'm sorry it did happen. Only I should have run when the cupboard door opened and Graham's voice rolled through the air like pebbles into the sea. Ayacha, I thought I had some canned milk. She stepped off the footstool. She must have gone to the cupboard above the fridge where she stored tidal wave supplies. And now she stood in the doorway looking into the living room where I was sunk into her couch, my hands immobilized by a snarl of raffia. Old lady, her eyes widened a fraction. Would you go to the Merc for me? Sure, Tutoku, I said, using her nickname, a periwinkle, a small snail. I once asked her how she got that name. I don't know, she said in that musical way she has of speaking, pulling out the second word. I don't know. But then she added, it was my auntie's name. We both like stinky oil, that seal oil that's been sitting around for a long time. Family connections among people in the village can be confusing on their own, but nicknames are even more complicated. I held out the tangled fibers that fought back even after I had given up trying to wrestle them into the circular bottom of a basket. This was hopeless. I told your dad to come tonight for pumpkin pie. She took the weaving, looking good. Graham, it's a rat's nest. She handed it back with a $5 bill. You'll want more than dessert, Graham. I slipped on my windbreaker. She nodded toward the formica table where a happy silver salmon dampened sheets of newsprint. He brought it, but I need canned milk for that pumpkin pie. Dad's not a bad cook, but Graham is better. I have a room at her place and one at home. During the school year, Dad often works late at the cannery and sleeps in long after I should be at school, so I frequently stay with Graham. It was summer now, so I slept at home, but I ate most dinners with Graham. When I first arrived at Unalaska, the school was a 4-room building with a basement. When the doctor from the ANS hospital came out on a short visit, he'd have an office downstairs. And going down the gray steps was like descending into one of the higher rings of Dante's hell. You were met by the building's furnace growling away. You knew that just off in one of the dark corners, obscured by shadows or cobwebs, was another set of steps going down even further. Anyway, the doctor put a stethoscope to my chest and listened and said, you have a juvenile heart. And that seemed appropriate for someone teaching first and second grades. And maybe it helped when I tried to write in the voice of an adolescent. Here's Booker John, the boy, introducing himself. For me, the beginning was a lot like the end. I tripped and went flying. That's not who I am. I like order. I want to know what's going to happen next. My parents, Spike and Tulip, write mysteries. They also love obscure scientific facts, which is probably why I have these odd snippets in my head. Did you know, for example, that 36 is both a square and a triangular number? Or that while there are infinite prime numbers, there are only 3 primary colors? Before I started school, Mom had called me Sparrow and Dad had called me Mouse. Don't ask me where those nicknames came from, but I think it was Mouse because I'm curious about things, and Sparrow because, well, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a little bit short for my age. Anyway, I'm almost always Booker now. To tell the truth, sometimes they forget and I automatically answer to Sparrow and sometimes to Mouse. I don't mind. I'm a pretty happy kid. Don't expect any heroics. Writing about the place, and of course this book takes place in the Aleutian Islands, was much easier because I had lived there for decades. And here's Booker in a passage. We were balanced on a loose crust of earth. I stumbled after Anna, feeling a warm presence close behind me. The breeze was in front, pushing against us as we climbed a narrow path bordered with soft heather, the trail now here, now there, now suddenly gone. Whatever dampness remained in my clothes soon evaporated. When I leaned into the wind, it acted like a full body walking stick, giving me a wedge of support. I focused my eyes on the ground for stones, flat and loose, and ready to slide for creeping stems of shrubs, bare and brown, and more like roots than branches that rose just high enough to trip me. We stepped onto an expanse of flaked shale and made our way across the inward curve of a high valley. After another upward stretch, I saw the great volcano brooding off in the distance all by itself. Its green skirt rose to a crown of rocks cut with deep crevices, packed with years and years of snow and ice. Time had no passage there. The second question that I wondered about has to do with cultural material that's not ethnographically accurate. And this is a fantasy novel that's suffused with ethnographic information. On the book's website, which I think is www.ivoryandpaper.com. Anyway, on the website, there are pages of references and notes where I detail almost everything I put into the book. But there are 2 important characters who are complete inventions. That's the volcano woman and a young man named Laloch, or Yellow Cedar, her assistant. I've tried to imbue his story with elements found in early Unanga hunting practices and war. The volcano woman, on the other hand, is mostly imaginary. Nothing like her exists in the corpus of Unanga stories and traditions. There is a volcano woman, but very, very different. Here's a passage where they first meet. Lalo is still a young boy at this point. He and his sister, now dead, had been captured by rival Unanga from Kagamal Island and made slaves. He was taken berry picking by a cluster of old women, and he's wandered away in this excerpt. He climbed higher and higher and stepped across bare rock onto a bank of clouds. The damp air closed around him as solid as water. He stopped and stared. He listened. He tried to see through the murk towards something darker, a shape that smoldered along its edges. He stepped forward as the haze cleared. A woman stood before him and held out a bowl of berries. Take this, Lalo, she said, using his name. He saw the glint of iridescence in her eyes. She was a spirit of fire who coated green valleys with ash. She befriended eagles and hawks, kept owls for company. She lived among flames and sulfur. Fire surrounded her with healing. Take this, she said, He extended his hands. If you stay here, you will be safe. That night he slept where the Kagable men could not find him. He wrapped himself in a blanket of sea otter fur. By the light of a stone lamp, by the light of the moon, he remembered how his sister had looked at him for the last time. And when dawn broke across the sea, the body of a whale rose like a dark tongue. Well, what happens, I wondered, when incorrect ethnographic information is incorporated into a story? Well, it's only a story, it can be ignored. But in life, in the life of a living and breathing culture, let me give an example where the result has been positive. Today's male Unanga dancers will often wear bentwood visors and full-crowned hats, simply glorious productions. Women dancers will wear elaborately beaded headdresses, stunning when still they're vibrantly dramatic when set in motion. But if we look at the historical record, women dancers did not wear head coverings. They danced bareheaded. These beaded head coverings originated in the Kodiak area and were introduced to the Aleutians by Kaji Gill, a Koryak dancer whom the Atka village brought to Alaska specifically to help reintroduce dance in 1994. For Unanga, with an understanding of history, they are reminders of what their traditional enemies wore. They have no cultural validity in the Aleutians, and they are an intrusion on the historical record. Their adoption by the young dancers at Atka was, I think, a flash of brilliance. At first I thought, well, this can't be right. They shouldn't be wearing those beaded headdresses. And then I remembered Angali Agni Aginah, Daylight Lifter. The longest and most complex story is that Soloviev provided Yokelson in the winter of 1910. It tells how two brothers from Tigolda made a journey to Kodiak. They arrived, roused the jealousy of local people, survived assassination attempts, and escaped the magic of a couple of powerful witches. They each returned home to Tagalda with a wife. Well, I thought, if Unanga's sons can take wives from the Kodiak people, surely Unanga daughters can take beaded head coverings. As I said, the adoption of these head coverings by the young dancers at Atka was a flash of brilliance. Anna struggles with her identity, with what it means to be Unanga in the 21st century. My hope in writing Ivory and Paper was to offer encouragement to young people of all backgrounds, really, facing questions of that sort, questions for which there are no easy answers. When dance was being reintroduced to Unanga communities, a young dancer from Atka remarked that people were sometimes baffled when he told them he was Aleut. Quote, "But they understand who I am after they see me dance," he said. "This lets them know who we are," unquote. He might have added not only who we are, but who we are becoming. And that, I think, is the power of art. There's another question, of course, whether or not I, who am not Unanga, could say anything remotely true or relevant about cultural identity. I was and am continually reminded of what Anfisa Shepsikoff wrote to me, I think in 1968. She'd been reading William Healy Dahl's 1878 on the remains of later prehistoric man. It's a long paper or a short book about Unanga mummies recovered from the islands of Four Mountains in the 1870s. Damn people, she wrote, lies and lies. They never say anything true about Aleuts. That was what she wrote to me. Early in my teaching career, I also received several blasts from a woman named Alexandra Gromov. Her daughter was in my first grade class, and she would write to me criticizing outsiders who dared to write about her paper. Her letters were like a blowtorch. She moved away in the 1960s, but I'd see her occasionally in Anchorage or visit her in Seattle or call and talk with her on the phone. And she was always passionately vocal about who could define what it means to be Unanga. And I suppose she had to be nice to me because her brother was my Acha, and if she criticized me, it meant criticizing her brother, the priest. It's a question that's often in my mind. It's one I've never answered. And I've wondered if answering it would stop me from doing what I love. I don't know. I only know, to use a couple of negatives, that it has not stopped me. Now, on the on the PowerPoint thingamajig, I had another passage I was going to read. I had typed up all the passages so you could read them along with me. And I don't even know what page I had that on. But anyway, it had to do with a little bit with this question of identity and with how we come to know who we are. So that's basically it. Ivory and Paper Adventures in and Out of Time. It's a novel and very different from anything else I've written. And if you get a chance to read it, I hope you'll enjoy it. So I don't know if there are any questions that have been tossed in or not, but
Yeah.
I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, magnificent. Honestly, I'm thrilled. I find you charming as a person, and so thank you for the presentation. Thanks for being a good sport. I feel like we're all kind of guinea pigs in the sort of technological world that we're living in. So I appreciate you taking part in this. I will say to anybody who's tuning in online, I do have the spreadsheet open here. So please, if you're listening in and you'd like to submit a question, I hope you'll do so. I have a few questions, Ray.
Sure.
Some of them are selfish because I teach part-time here in some of the programs, and I've used Ivory and Paper for as a course text for some, like a YA writer's course. I guess my first question, so a couple of my questions kind of have to do with that scenario. I'm looking at the screen off to the side here. I'll try and look at you so you have somebody to talk to here. I get my first question is about, I'm always interested in genre, and you mentioned genre before in terms of its novelness and its I think sort of YA-ness and even like speculative. It's clearly like speculative fiction, and I think it even kind of dips its toe into the ever expanding form of kind of climate fiction to some extent. And so I guess I wonder what you think, like what prompted you to write a young adult novel, and how do you think about how the book in particular relates to its I think more than one genre that it kind of fits into?
It probably relates to more than one genre because I didn't know what I was doing. And and so I was trying to write a story that would be encouraging to folks. I taught in the Illusions for about 30 years, and I just found this great vitality among the students, and of course, when I first started, the village was just primarily an Aleut village, and an Unanga village. And by the time I left, it had become, the Unanga students were definitely in the minority. And I think no matter in which year you pick, there were always these same questions of how do I fit into this society, or who am I? And so I think I was working with that question. And it seemed to me a lot of the answer to that has to do with who a person's ancestors are, and the importance of understanding the culture that you're part of. And I think for Anunga, it's difficult because there's not much in the literature, and most of the stuff that's in the literature is highly technical kinds of things. And so I wanted to write something that that was a bit more fun to read, and that addressed some of these issues. And so I tried very hard to make sure that when I mentioned anything ethnographic, that it was sound.
Thanks. Yeah, my second question is kind of related to that, and I guess it's kind of selfish, but if you have, do you as an educator, have you taught the book, and would you be interested in teaching it, and what are maybe some of the sort of highlights that you would try and draw out, or themes that you would try and draw out in terms of a program of study that focused on ivory and paper?
Good question. I've never taught. No, I've never taught it, because I had retired from teaching, and long before I wrote it. Um, and oh dear. Um, I suppose if you were teaching it, you would have to do what you do is to approach it from different angles, in terms of character development. Does the plot work? Is there a consistency in it? Um, and are the questions that are raised, are they answered at the end, or at least addressed thoroughly enough so that you get a feeling that they're not being skirted or talked over. Um, and there are a lot of characters in the book, some that are good and some that are somewhat evil. One that's particularly nasty, I guess. And so there might be questions related to that. And the whole question as to whether there's a reality behind the mythological stories is not exactly resolved at the end. And so there's that question, I think.
Thanks. That's helpful advice, actually. So we do have a question from the live stream. It's actually a couple of comments and nice and responsive comments that the person says, you've succeeded. The book is fun. The questions are, the first one is, will you write another like it? And the comment after that, let me see if I think I have to scroll here. I don't see the whole thing. There it is. Okay, sorry. The person says, I'm moved by your underscoring the idea of, quote, becoming, unquote. How Unanga culture with ancient roots is still becoming. And with that, your statement about how art becomes a catalyst for cultural innovation. And there's a question mark after that, which I take to mean just, can you respond to the comment? And then, of course, the first question was, what are your plans for your next book?
That's probably the easier one. I'm working on a long book on Unanga basketry. A couple of years ago, I had the great privilege of going with Agnes Thompson, and to look at the prehistoric weavings from the islands of Four Mountains at the Smithsonian, and we looked at the examples and studied the techniques and so on, and found some weaving techniques that are no longer practiced. Anyway, so I'm working on this long book about allied basketry, and then I finished a manuscript on art and identity in the Aleutians, called "Walking into the Wind," and so that's the easy answer. And am I going to write another junior fiction book? Probably not. I've thought about it. I've thought about taking the same two characters and maybe moving them to a different locale. But I write slowly and I revise so much. And right now I'm primarily interested in getting this basketry book completed. And I think I forgot the second part of the question.
Yeah, the second part is it's a rich, I think, comment, but provocative. So the notion of becoming and how Unanga culture with ancient roots is still becoming, and with that, your thoughts about how art becomes a catalyst for cultural innovation.
Yeah, I think we see that in very exciting ways in the Aleutians, both with the dance that's gone. It's come out in different communities, with the remarkable work with bentwood hats that Andrew Gronholz started, and the sculpture work of Gert Savarni and other artists, both in the Aleutians and outside of the Aleutians. And I think the other thing that's really important is place. And I think that living in the Aleutians is is a necessity, for understanding the tie-in between ancient roots and contemporary art. I think you have to become acquainted with the sights and the smells and the sounds of living on an island, living close to the sea, being engaged in subsistence activities of that sort, in order to really plumb the depths that an artist needs to do. I mean, I think it's one thing to be an Unanga artist who's never lived in the Aleutians, but it's quite another to be an Unanga artist who lives in the Aleutians. And I think that makes it difficult, because living in the Aleutians has never been easy, and it's not easy now, because there's not that much employment, and there's certainly very little employment for an artist. It's difficult to get your work seen, and so on. But I think it's very important. But at the same time, it's very encouraging that there are things like various summer camps and so on that are held for students who don't live in the Aleutians but are Unanga, and so they get an opportunity to at least get a taste or flavor for what's real in that cultural environment.
Thanks, Ray.
It's very encouraging, though. Excuse me. There's this notion of becoming, and that Unanga are continually evolving. Well, that's true of everybody, I think, in these days. But it's very exciting to see what's happening.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think having lived in a number of different places, I think that, Alaska is a big place, but I think overall it's definitely one of the most culturally rich and sort of multicultural places I think that exists anywhere. And so it's a unique opportunity that we have to engage with culture and with history and language in really distinct and unique ways. And I think that Ivory and Paper is a really good example of that. I think it's a magnificent, as you suggested earlier, Ray, I think it was a process for the book to come together. And I'm thrilled to hear you talk about it, and to have the end result here, and to have it be such a densely rich and sophisticated text, and at the same time have appeal for people of many different ages. So I think it's a monumental accomplishment. So I definitely appreciate that. And I know that everybody that I've shared the book with has felt the same way. So thanks for writing it, and thanks for taking time to do this. I know it's late there in New England where you're at. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and to read for us. And I think there's one more comment that said, we're glad we got to see your face and bookshelf instead of a PowerPoint. So so maybe a serendipitous, I think, result of our
the PowerPoint was magnificent. You don't know what you missed.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks again, Ray.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everybody who tuned in. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to the next time.